and monitoring varies from state to state. Nationwide, there are close to 700,000 registered sex offenders, ranging from repeat offenders with lengthy records to 18-year-olds having sex with underage teens. Some legal analysts say the lack of consistency state to state and the workload of maintaining a registry are creating a system with serious loopholes. So, Congresswoman Norton, does the J.C. Dugard case cry out for some national, federal tracking system for sex offenders?
Certainly, Bonnie, with a very tough lesson. To stop paperworking everything that looks like sex and concentrate on hardcore sex offenders.
We need to do a lot more. Even after Congress passed a law in 2006, states had 3 years to have some type of a uniform system, but it's simply not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a former sexual abuse survivor and rape survivor myself, and I can tell you, this is hard stuff. So anything we can do in our society to send a clear message, this is not acceptable. But I got to say at the same time, we got to make sure that we have legislation that protects women, allows them to be independent, and allows them to provide for themselves at the same time. It goes together.
I think it'd be tempting to look at new laws that should be enacted, but there was a breakdown in the systems in place. Law enforcement visited that house, knew the name was on the registry, and didn't go in after they got complaints. So I think the fault lies with those officers.
Yeah. All right. So exactly. I mean, when you look at what's been discovered ex post her release, her being freed from captivity, there was him following in his van apparently on Google Maps when they were mapping his street. He had his first victim, for whom he went to jail, not his first victim, worked at a casino in Nevada. He got out of jail 11 years later, showed up, tracked her down again to scare the bejesus out of her, and they went to his house 508 to check, and they didn't notice all the craziness in the backyard. So there were several places where this the fire could have been put out a lot sooner, and it didn't happen. So,
and that 911 call from the neighbors that said there are these children in the backyard. You're absolutely correct on this. I mean, in order for us to fight this kind of stuff, we all have to hold ourselves responsible, including the law enforcement officers that were there. They got sweet talked out of not even going into that house.
Well, this is a lot of malpractice law enforcement. But think about what we're asking the law enforcement to do. You know, these are good guys and girls, these law enforcement folks. Mm-hmm. You give them a bunch of paperwork, and you keep adding newer people. Right. And they include, a 16-year-old who had sex with a 15-year-old. And that life gets ruined forever, because you got to keep track of this kid. Yeah. Even though, of course, we've been throwing sex at this kid on all the media and the CDs and the rest. So we spend a lot of time on that, rather than saying, look, let's divide out these people and concentrate on this group of people, because they need real oversight.
Well, why can't that be done? And
because
why isn't that being?
State. Because it's state by state.
But doesn't that call for get rid of the state registries and put them all in the same computer and have a federal registry?
The federal registry, you would think that's not rocket science, and that it's taking so long. I agree with you to do that. It's an outrage. But after you do that, look at what we're going to have to really do. It's all about enforcement. Who is going to go out there and look at the people, I won't say guys, that you really have to look at.
And law enforcement is so overwhelmed right now. They just can't keep track. There have been a change every single decade to these sex offender laws and trying to track them. Police officers can't keep up. The Adam Walsh law that was passed in 2006 essentially said you have to have the same criteria across the states. And ultimately, at the end of this year, next we'll have a database. But part of that law also said you have to have community notifications. Right now, the states don't have to do that, and a lot of them don't. Just putting up an
isn't that why all of them, a whole bunch of them, lived in that same area as where Galito was living?
Yeah, because you have to be the certain state law. A lot of state laws say you can't be X feet from a school or a library or a bus stop, and there happens to be nothing in that area. That's why there's a high concentration. All the more reason you would have thought the law enforcement would have done a better job knowing that there was such a high concentration of sex offenders.
Yeah, I mean, just the thing about this, I cannot get past the fact that an officer was at the house, knew about complaints, didn't bother to check the list, and these poor girls were harmed for their life.
But this was pro forma law enforcement. The thing says you got a list, check in once a year, go to the next house. But I blame the system far more than the law.